Latiya City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
I had an interesting conversation with Neil today. I described him as a professional speaker and he said, "I'm not a professional speaker. I have been around the world 5 times giving talks on cruise ships, but for free, but that's not professional speaking." Sounds like a professional speaker to me. Anyway, so Neil's going to he's given talks before on Hollywood and movies, etc. So today he's going to give some reflections on life and the journey, and he's a wonderful speaker and a really cool guy. So come on up, Neil Davidson.
Good morning, everybody. So put your hands up if you feel slightly uncomfortable about the way the world is going at the moment. It's pretty good majority, I think. So imagine you're a teenager and you've got a life where you've got AI, which is probably going to take away your job. You've had COVID, which has kept you away from your friends. You've been in isolation. You've got social media, which might be bullying you or giving you all sorts of false information. You don't know what the truth is and what you don't. You've got no heroes anymore, because the heroes we had when we were kids don't exist, because what the media's purpose is to cut down the tallest poppy. And it's such a shame, because I had heroes, loads of them. And when we had history lessons, we believed in what was then the British Empire and all that stuff. And now it's all dismissed, and people scorn it. So where can they model themselves? How can they actually get to the kind of wisdom that most of us will have had in our lifetimes? So it took me 70 years, I think, to find a kind of wisdom. And I made a load of mistakes, and I've had serious ups and downs, as I'm sure everyone in the room has had. I've made many mistakes, but one of the things which is... Can you hear me? One of the things which has impressed upon me is to leave the pain behind and take the learning. Because every time you have a misfortune or something happens in your life, even when it really hurts, it's always teaching you something. And every success is built on a succession of failures. So I wanted to just share my life with you. They say that we all have a library in us, and that library burns when we die. And I think it's really important to keep a record. And I wanted to share some stories that I have of my life, which we all have a library within us. So I would recommend that you actually to keep a record for all the ones you love and the people who follow you of the things and the learnings that you've had. One of the things in the projects that I started was for my grandson. So I wrote my life story, or started writing my life story, and I took at the end of each chapter I put the learnings, and I sent them to my daughter to talk through with him. So it was the stuff that they don't teach you at school. So you learn geography, you learn history, you learn maths, you do English. But who teaches you how to pick your friends? What your attitude towards happiness and joy should be? How your attitude towards other people, how your self-esteem is built. All the things which are really invaluable in life, very few people ever teach you. And everybody in this room, if you think of the thousands of years of experience in this room, we've got so much to offer. And what I would like to do is to build a bridge between youth and the vitality of youth and the wisdom of age, and build that. And I'm trying to get it actually put into schools in England at the moment, where it benefits both sides, because we've kind of lost contact. If you're growing up now, the world is full of hate. You've got politicians who hate each other. If someone believes something you don't believe in, you hate them, you want to stop them. And it's a very dangerous trend. And so I feel that if the world doesn't find a sense of neighborliness and love and a joint spirit, I think we've pretty much had it. And we're all certainly I'm getting very sort of contemplative about what on earth handles in the future. And most of you, I'm sure, will have seen a film called Forrest Gump. And the opening scene in Forrest Gump is a feather that's being blown around in the wind. And that's pretty much been my life. I've never known what's going to happen next. And the tiniest little event that happens has changed the course of my life. So my wife I met because I talked to her on a train for 10 minutes. I plucked up the courage to say hello, and all of a sudden, 3 years later, we got married. So you're never really in control of what's happening. You can't change the past, you can't tell what the future holds, but what you can do is treasure the moment. And so many of us don't actually think of what the moment means, and I'm trying to teach that to my grandson, is to enjoy it. John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're planning other things. As a child, I used to read adventure stories. I had a favorite author called Henry Rider Haggard, who wrote, his most famous book was called King Solomon's Mines. And he wrote adventure stories about usually the Brits in Africa, and amazing, politically incorrect stuff, but it was about heroes. I sat in the cinema at least 3 times a week watching my heroes and the stories, and I thought, if nothing else, my life is going to be an adventure. And I think if some of you think about hello? So if you think back to your childhood, whatever story that you loved, whatever themes you really were attracted to as a child, have probably formed the script for your life. So mine, I love Greek mythology. I love the gods and monsters. I loved the drama. I loved all the mythology offered. My nightmare is technology. I hate it. Brad's been incredibly helpful, by the way. So the best memories, I think, are about people, not things. That's a big learning for me. Is I look back on my life, I've had almost every material thing that anyone could reasonably want. But all my memories are about people, not things, my best memories. And most of them about when I'm giving, not taking. And maybe it resonates with you, but I know we visited my grandson a school in Chiang Mai. It was an orphanage. I wanted him to see how some other people live in other parts of the world. And it was incredibly moving, the joy of these people for so little. We gave them books and pens and stuff like that. But for so little, that meant very little to me, I got the most amazing screams of joy. And that means more to me than a Rolls Royce. That's me. I've still got the quirky eyebrow. I think it was a firework went off or something later, not very early in life. So I was born with a golden spoon in my mouth, really. My dad, who'd come from nothing, I'll tell you about later, but he had a couple of inventions, and so we lived in some style. That was a castle we had in Scotland with 32 bedrooms. When we were in London, we had a house, this one here, the white one, that was only 5 bedrooms. It was very small. And we had 7 acres there to go with it, and we had swimming pools and saunas and everything else. And just for weekends, we had a house on the coast in Sussex. And so it was a very, very privileged childhood. But the thing I remember was sitting by the swimming pool and thinking I'd swap all this for a friend. Because I was sent away to boarding school, as I'll tell you a little bit later. We lived in splendid isolation. I had a brother who was 4 years older than me, who used to be pretty tough on me. And I just remember being very lonely through most of my childhood. I think I went to one children's party, and my mum dropped me off. I was so excited. I was about 7, I think. And they'd had their chimney cleaned in the morning, and there was a pile of soot at the bottom of their garden. And I found this soot, and I was bathing in it. I was covered in it. And they rang up my mother and said, "Your son has been disgraced. Come and get him." So I was taken away. So that was my one children's party. So again, the learning I had all my life is that treasure friends. Make the effort to stay in touch, to build friendships, to retain friendships. It's probably the most important thing that we can ever do. So my dad, when I was born, was 42, so the war had taken a big chunk out of his life. And he was probably the biggest influence on my life. He's a very, very powerful character. He looked like Winston Churchill. He smoked cigars, very charismatic person. He'd been abandoned by his mother in the north of Scotland and brought up by his grandmother in abject poverty. His mother took his baby brother to Sydney, Australia, and left him behind. He used to eke an existence out by caddying at the local golf club for people. He had a great singing voice as a child. He used to get asked to the rich people's houses. He said, "For the first time I saw what money was, how people lived who had money." And he said, "One day I shall come back to this village in a Rolls Royce." And in 1963, we went back to this little village called Banchory in Scotland in the Rolls Royce. with banners across saying, "Welcome back, Eric." Before you think I'm a totally spoiled rich kid, I can set your mind at rest. We lost everything, so I had to start again. So this is not an easy trip. It's something which all of us have had at some stage where you think I thought I was going to retire at 18. It was a nasty shock when I found out I had to work. So my dad's favorite saying really was, never one door closes but another one opens. He was in the RAF in the war, and because the attrition rate was so bad of Air Force people, he went from nothing to wing commander in 6 months. I think they averaged about 5 missions before they were supposed to be finished. Anyway, he was shot down, and he got invalided back to England, and he joined a company called Vickers Armstrong who made the Spitfire. And in those days, the Spitfire cost £6,000 to make. He joined in the works department. He was a foreman, and he worked out a way where he thought he could double production. So at midnight, he went around, he changed the drawings on all the design desks. And the boss called him in and said, "Well, tonight you'll either go up or you'll go out." Anyway, he doubled the production of Spitfires, and he got promoted. He was in charge. And he had total power of people, because a lot of the people who worked in the factory were conscientious objectors. And if they played up, he could send them down the mines, because that was the other option. So he was kind of an interesting character. Quite strong. He didn't really understand children, so I never had a teddy bear. I never had any play with him. Any time I think I had half an hour of play with him when I had a water gun, and I used to fire at him, and we used to run around the garden. But that was probably the only play. I didn't get children's books. My first book I ever got was The Man in the Grey Flannel Suit, which was a business book when I was 8. I got How to Win Friends and Influence People when I was 9, and I was designing business plans when I was 10. And I remember when I went to my boarding school, because one of the very strange quirks of English sort of money is they send their children away so they never see them, and I was one of those kids. Anyway, what happened with him was, after the war, he joined a bank, and he, like everything else in life, he rose very quickly. And they said, "We're going to put you on the main board." So they checked him out, and they said, "I'm sorry, you'll never go anywhere with this bank, because your parents weren't married. And if your parents weren't married in those days, it blocked your process into anything that was worth having." So he said, "The only way I can ever make a success or do anything is to go out on my own." So he started a little company trading, and he and my mum set up this little business. That's my brother, by the way, Rod, who's 4 years older than me. His favorite trick was to lock me in the log basket when I was 3 and see how long it would take me to get out. My screams would alert my mother to come and get me. So my dad invented a thing called the die spring, which is this thing here. And it's basically, when you're dyeing yarns, you wrap it round, and this spring had a very high percentage of open surface, so the dye liquor could come out and dye the yarns. And he was making 50 here and 50 there. And he got an inquiry from a Yorkshire mill, and they said, "We're looking to buy 150,000. And there was a shed at the bottom of the garden. And they said, "We want to inspect your factory." He said, "You can't, it's a trade secret." So they worked day and night. They made the springs. He went off to the States to promote this thing after a little while. And within 3 years, 90% of all the yarn in the world was dyed on these things here. And we had a factory in Hampshire and in Hungerford in Hampshire, or Berkshire, that made these things. And they literally used to export to 42 countries. We had a patent on, or he had a patent on them. So for 20 years, everything, he could just make up the price. He made a fortune. In 1961, his company profit was about £170,000, which I don't know what it's worth now, but it's many millions. So then we went to the States, and he saw this new craze starting called a hula hoop. And he came back, and he thought, wow, no one's selling them in the UK. And he found these machines that made plastic curtain rod. And they were going cheap, so he bought a couple of these machines and just changed them so they're extruding hula hoops onto the ground. And all it was just extrude it in a circle, cut it, and put a wooden plug, staple it, and they had a hula hoop. And he sold 18 million in 6 months. So it was a license to print money. He was an amazing man. He was Aberdonian granite. He was tough. You couldn't shock him. But he was his granny who looked after and brought him up. He worshipped, and she died the day the Second World War broke out. And he had a wonderful headmaster who actually had paid for his uniform and bought him shoes and stuff to go to school. And even to the end of his life, whenever he mentioned his granny or his headmaster, tears used to come. He was a granite man with a very big heart. And he was also a lion. If we had any problems, he was the first person, like the cavalry coming in. He was like an amazing person to have behind you. And although I had a emotionally cold time, it was, I always knew I was loved. So it was a fantastic base for growing up, really. As I said, I was sent away to school at 8. So the place over there on the right was my prep school, which belonged to this general called General Pitt Rivers. It was a very foreboding place. As you walked in, you could smell the discipline and the disinfectant. They took your temperature, castor oil every morning, discipline, tight ties put on, up at 7:30 to be inspected, punishment. The headmaster was a 6'3" Dickensian character. And he had an old First World War shell in the corner, and he kept his favorite canes in there at various flexibilities, so he used to work out which was the best one to suit your particular backside. So my dad we drove up. It was in the middle of nowhere. It's like going to the surface of the moon. There's these enormous grounds. He drove over a cattle grid onto this gravel drive, and he said, "Bye, son, do well." And off you go, and you go into this big place, and you think, my God. And if you cried, you were in for it, because the other kids didn't like kids who cried. This is the British stiff upper lip. So my first key learning, which took me 50 years to get over, was don't show anybody any emotion, because when you show emotion, you get hurt. And that's probably the falsest lesson I ever learned. So anyway, I went there. We had a remarkable academic record, really, because they didn't mark our papers out of 100, like most schools. They used to mark them out of 5 with 1 off for every mistake. So if we got worse than 96%, we were a failure. It was a brilliant paradigm of how to actually do exams. So it was a feeder school for Eton. Most of the Eton kids come from that particular prep school. And as you know, Eton has provided 13 UK prime ministers, which is probably why UK is in the shit right now. So then I went to an amazing school called Stowe, which you can see at the bottom here. It was the Duke of Buckingham's home until 1923, and it makes Buckingham Palace look like a shed. It has man-made lakes. It's now, also, apart from being a school, it's now the biggest project the National Trust has ever had. Again, turn up, this massive place. So having gone from bottom to top in a prep school, you then start again from the bottom with all these people. And the teachers there was appalling, really. But it's one of the most expensive schools in the country. But it recruited a lot of people, I think, who were redundant after the Second World War. We had really boring maths teachers. We used to have a common room, and then when you were 16, you got a study, which you shared. My study, because I had money at the time, I used to fill it with biscuits and cakes and everything. They used to call it Tesco's, and everyone used to come and raid it. They thought, well, he can afford it, we'll take the money. Anyway, my supposed best friend was taking all my LPs, which, as we know, in the 70s, were your big pride with the LPs. You had all the bands you liked. So someone said, "Brian's stealing all your LPs." I said, "He can't be." "Yeah, it's Brian. He was my best friend." So I said, anyway, they showed me, his tuck box was full of all my stuff. So I said, "You've been nicking my stuff." He said, "I'm going to make your life hell." So he was a captain of games, captain of cricket, captain of rugby, and as you know, in British schools, whoever's best at sport has tremendous influence. So for a year, he made my life hell. I had ink pots coming through my window. I had banderillas coming through the door. Every time I walked across a courtyard, I thought, oh my God, they're coming across now. I had to just hold on, because if they saw you weakening, it was a big, a big thing. Anyway, before I thought, well, I must get out of here. So I worked like hell. And I got my A-levels 2 years early at 16 and got out. So it was the whole childhood thing for me. I've lived my life in reverse, really, because I have a much simpler life now, but I'm 1,000 times happier. So it taught me the material stuff comes and goes, and the way we treat other people, and kindness and love and friendship are everything. Just having a look. I've got some key learnings down here. I don't want to miss it. Yeah, I hate bullies. I've always hated bullies. And one thing my dad always did, if he saw anyone being bullied, if he saw a receptionist being bullied by a hotel guest or something, he'd always wade in. And I like to think one of the things he taught me was moral courage. If you see something going wrong, you should step in. Not necessarily in Thailand because you're in trouble, but generally speaking, you should actually get involved. So anyway, I went to Lausanne University in Switzerland for 6 months. I mucked about, and I had a place to do law. And my dad said to me, he said, "Nah," he said, "don't be a lawyer." He said, "Be an accountant. Accountant rules the world." And I said, well, all right then. I thought I'd always found exams easy, so I did accountancy. Well, I was the world's worst accountant. I started this thing, and I was 18 million quid out in 1972 on the balance sheet. And then we used to get sent up in the middle of Wales to do a tax course. And I was just so bored. And so we had an exam at the end of the thing, and I turned it over, and I couldn't understand a word of it. So I got the giggles, and I set 200 people off in laughter, and they ruined the whole exam for everybody. So the partner in the accountancy firm, which is now Ernst Young, said, "I'm sorry, Davidson, you're not suited." So that was the tail end of my accountancy career. So anyway, when I was 21, I left there, and my dad said to me, "Right, for your birthday, I can either send you anywhere in the world you want to go, or give you a massive party." And I said, "Well, I want to go to Hollywood," because my whole environment as a child, my happiness and all my excitement was from film. I used to watch every film I used to watch till the end of the titles came. Gregory Peck, Charlton Heston, David Niven, all these people I got to know very well later on. But all these people were fantastic. I used to watch it. My head used to get away from all this mundane bullying and everything else into the adventure and the heroes. I always loved heroes. So I went to Hollywood. I bought a white suit because I think Saturday Night Fever had just come out. And I went out, and I knew one person, a chap called Walter Murch, who's now won 3 Oscars, 2 BAFTAs, and Lifetime Achievement Awards. He's the preeminent film editor in the world. Anyway, he's my oldest friend. And I rang him up, and I said, "Is there anything happening out there?" And he said, "Well, we're making a film called Apocalypse Now in San Francisco. And it's nightmare. Everything's going wrong. But if you want to, you can come be a gopher. You can help make the coffee and run around and do stuff." So I went up to San Francisco, and Zoetrope Studios, which is Francis Coppola's place in San Francisco, is a fantastic building in San Francisco. And I'm there the first day, and in through the door, Francis is already there, comes Marlon Brando. And so he says, "Hello, kid." And I was saying, "Hello, Mr. Brando." I was very English, and I was very green and very shy. And so he loved it because he could embarrass me. He had a great sense of humor and a great practical joker. He says, "I like you, kid. You can make my coffee and you can look after me when I need it." So the first job he gave me, the first day, was he said, "I'm writing my autobiography, and I can't remember if I've been to bed with Ursula Andress." He said, "Will you ring her?" And I said, "I can't do that." Anyway, I had to ring her and said, "Miss Andress, I sound terribly embarrassed, but did you ever go to bed with Marlon?" She said, "Of course I did." And apparently he did it with everybody, all his assistants. It was a practical joke. He was a fantastic character. His trademark of looking down and up at the camera was because he could never remember lines. So his lines, I've got a picture here of Robert Duvall. Marlon's lines are actually on the shirt. In Superman, when he puts the baby onto the rocket, when he lifts the baby up, the lines are on the nappy. He was very eccentric. He could get away with everything. When he made a film when he couldn't stand Frank Oz, the Muppet guy, and they're making this film together. And Marlon took a letter into the director, saying from the doctor to say he was allergic to Frank Oz, wouldn't talk to him. So we had Marlon and Frank Oz like 6 feet apart, but they couldn't communicate with each other and arguing. Anyway, the Apocalypse Now, with a normal film, you take about 23 hours of film to cut it down to 2.5 hours of film. With Apocalypse Now, it was 130 hours because the script was changing, there's arguments, everyone's high on coke, there's bloody marijuana everywhere. It was like the Vietnam War actually making it. They made a documentary on it about it. They had the technology for the sound system. We had a thing bigger than this black table here, which was $500,000. Now, for $300, you can get a better sound system for your mic, for your PC. We had, because it was before digital film, we had 9.5 tons of physical film, and it was all in dustbins around a room. And they suddenly said, we need a smooth transition on a scene. So we're going through 9.5 tons of stuff to find a 4-inch length of film to do a smooth transition. The story was all over this. Marlon hadn't read the book, he wouldn't learn his lines. He said, I don't like the name of the main character called Kurtz. I want to be called Lele because it sounds softer. Then the day before he finished, he said, oh no, I like the name Kurtz. So we had to redub it again. Marlon was about 27 stone, or whatever that is in pounds, 350. He was a big, big guy, which is why when you see Apocalypse Now, it's all filmed in the dark because they didn't have an army uniform big enough for him. So it was an amazing. In Apocalypse Now, they had a hurricane which destroyed some of the sets. The US government thought this is an anti-war film, so they took the use of the helicopters away. So the whole thing was a disaster. Francis actually had a nervous breakdown. Now, of course, it's recognized by most people as probably the best war film ever made, or anti-war film ever made, and probably in the top 5 of all films ever made. So anyway, I worked with this on the film, helping Walter, and I got to know a lot of people. I used to stay at Francis Coppola's house in Napa Valley. He's got an amazing vineyard in Napa Valley. And one of the regular guests was George Lucas. And so anyway, he said, I'm starting a new company called Industrial Light and Magic. Do you want to come in and be part of the running of it? And so I didn't know who George Lucas was at the time. He wasn't a big name. And so I said, well, I'll ring my dad. So I rang up my father, and he said, we're in trouble financially at home. You better come home. Don't take the job because the film industry is precarious and you can lose everything. So I remember sitting in the plane coming back from Los Angeles in tears because I thought, I want to stay. This is such an opportunity for me to do what my dream is. And I came back because my dad said, no, we need your help back there. And so one of the key learnings to that was, don't let anyone else decide on the script for your life, particularly your parents. Make your own decisions as to how you live your life and what you're doing. So I came back to England, and we thought, my mum had died. When I was at school, I was about 15, and my housemaster, who was a vicar, but the vicar who was head of the commando section, used to beat us 3 times a week, called me and he said, I'm sorry, Davidson. He said, your mum's had a little operation. So you get a shiver down your spine. And it turned out she had breast cancer, so she had a breast removed. Anyway, my mum was a wonderful person. Everyone loved my mother, but respected my dad. And she was the real force and the strength behind my dad to allow him to be so successful. When she died, he went completely off the rails. So he's making stupid investments, selling everything. We had this house full of beautiful paintings. We had the largest collection of Chinese snuff bottles in the world. And all of a sudden they were gone. I said, what happened to those, Dad? And he said, oh, they went to Christie's or Sotheby's. So anyway, I saw it all disappearing. And it even got to the stage where the presents that my brother and myself had given him for my mum and dad's 25th wedding anniversary, he sold those as well. So it was a bit of a shock because it's very easy to get, mentally it's nice to go up in the world. It's pretty much of a shock when you're coming down, you have to start from nothing. So anyway, my brother and I thought, well, what can we do? So we happened to have a friend who was in the army in Aldershot, which was near where we lived. And at the time, we had another friend who was a security manager at the Playboy Club in London. And we had Arabs coming into London with hundreds of thousands of pounds in their briefcases. So he thought, well, we'll supply bodyguards. So we recruited about 20 Marines and Paras, and we got a contract with the Playboy Club in Curzon Street in London to supply bodyguards. But they were a pretty rough lot, and we had a situation where we started getting inquiries about supplying mercenaries to Angola and all sorts of stuff. And I said, this is not what we want to do. But the feather is floating across the wind. And one of the things we got sent when we were in the bodyguard business was a fiber optic torch for looking at the underside of cars. And fiber optics, as you know, is glass, which you can bend light around. And one of the things about fiber optics is you can't bypass it. With a copper wire or a cable, you can bypass the electricity. You cannot bypass light. So we had an idea of using fiber optics for building into prison bars and into perimeters. This barbed tape you see here, we used to put fiber optics into the flat one over there or into the circular one here. If anyone went through it, the fiber optic light would fail, and you'd have a signal to tell you where it happened. So we put a patent in on this. Immediately, the British government put a secrecy order on us because they said, this is amazing invention. You can't tell anybody else because it gives us a lead in security. Anyway, we argued because we've got all our money and all our time put into this thing, developing it. So they took it off and we started to sell. We had a little machine downstairs going clunk, 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 and we had inquiries. We used to roll on the floor laughing because we had phone calls saying, can you supply us for 26,000 miles for the Alaskan pipeline? Can you supply all the British prisons? We got 20,000 crime prevention officers wanting it for doorways and God knows what else. So it took off, and we thought, well, there's no way we can handle all these things. And at the time, it was the first major application for fiber optics in the world. They weren't putting fiber optics down as communication in those days. It was before the coaxial cable was coming up. So anyway, we hit this incredible wave of interest. It was very, very exciting, but of course, as you know, when you start a company, it takes you twice as long, it costs twice as much, and the revenue is half as much as you think it's going to be. So we put all this money in. We had two companies started to bid for us. One was an American company called ITT, and we had a British company called Pilkington Brothers who make glass. So they're bidding for us, and we thought in our innocence, it'll take a month to go through, we'll get it done, and that's it. Anyway, just before Christmas in 1980, we get a letter from the solicitor saying your legal bills are 90,000 quid. And we had the same day we had a letter from Pilkington saying we're thinking of dropping out because your lawyers are being so bloody stubborn. So my brother and I thought, well, we're going to go bust, so we might as well go bust in style. So we went skiing for a week in Verbier. And he had toothache and I had migraines because of the stress. And we came back and they said, we'll have one more go to finish this. On January the 8th, 1980, we go into this room and there's a pile of papers 3 foot high, and we start at about 10 in the morning, and they're still arguing this clause, and you think it's never going to happen, but just this clause, that clause. Eventually, anyway, 3:30 the next morning, we sign the last piece of paper. I can feel the holes in my shoes with the carpet underneath my shoes, and I walked out at 24 and made my first million. It was on paper, by the way. It wasn't literally £1 million. It was all on paper, but it gave us the confidence. So what we did was we found a niche. We'd find new technologies which hadn't really found major applications, and we used to ride on the back of that, build it up, and sell it to large companies. So you've come across quite a few of our products, I think, or one of my inventions, the resealable wet wipe, where you have the label, you pull back and you pull the wet wipe out. Well, that was a design goal I did to put into ladies' handbags, not for babies, but for surfaces and everything else. Well, I invented that, and within 3 months, I got a contract from Holt Lloyd, a big car company. They said, well, we think we'll take 200,000. They took 8 million in the first 3, it became their top-selling product. And I licensed it all over the world. We had a new way of molding plastic. We invented the meat pad. Underneath your chicken and beef, when you go to the supermarket, there's a super absorbent pad there. And we sent I remember one of my big satisfactions was I used to ring up when I first got the idea, and I used to ring up a buyer at a food company and say, will you take this product? He said, when I want it, lad, I'll give you a call.
go away. So anyway, later on, I sent a little cup of water with a little square of this super absorbent pad to all the supermarkets and said, take with instructions saying, take the water, pour it onto the pad and watch. And this stuff just goes like that. It feels dry and it sucks everything out. And it allows you to put under big chicken, beef, anything, fish, so there's no juice that runs down the counter and contaminates the shelf. Anyway, we were then specified by every single food company. So the buyer rings me up and says, Elad, he said, I'd like to take your product now. I said, I'm sorry, there's a 3-year waiting list. And he lost his contract with Marks and Spencer's. Yeah, so that was, the meat pad is up there, with the wet wipes. I actually patented a hole. I got 129 patents. We patented a hole for a tub of wet wipes. You need a certain size hole to create a tension on the paper so that it tears on the perforation. So I sold that. At the bottom, I retired and I went mad. Went to Brazil, bought a house and did stupid things. And I was talking to someone, I said, what's the future? And they said, it's interactivity on the net. So I thought, well, okay. So I sat down and I worked out a way of actually taking a presenter filming them against a green screen, and then I'd write a script for them. They would write it out, they would read it out, and I could place it by putting a bit of code into someone's website. I could make it interactive. So rather than have a dull page that says with just pictures of food mixers, you could have a presenter saying, walk this way and I'll show you our offer this month or whatever. And I thought, how do I get to the big companies so they can take these things? Because they'll pay a lot of money for it. So I had a friend who published In-Flight magazine, and we used to put the magazine in all the first-class compartments of British Airways. So I put this thing in there, I got this thing in, and of course, when you're traveling first class in British Airways, there's Procter & Gamble's chairman, and there's British Gas's chairman, there's all. So within 2 years, I had 70% of the top FTSE 100 companies buying these things, and I used to knock them out like shelling peas. And then, of course, the technology changed. In technology, there's always something about to leapfrog you. So I went from hero to zero, but I changed it into an advertising agency. So anyway, that was that. So it was kind of, and then my wife, unfortunately, that's my wife on the right, Debbie. So she was my soulmate. She was some of you, I think, met her once or twice. She was a wonderful person. I never heard her say anything mean or bad about anybody. So we got married in 2005. She's my second wife. I got children from my first wife. And so we got married in 2005. In 2013, her language started getting odd, and some of her behavior started getting odd. And it turned out she got this very rare kind of Alzheimer's, which is the same as Bruce Willis, the film star, has got. So bit by bit, her vocabulary got worse and worse. If you imagine your vocabulary as a tree, and every day someone comes and trims the branches, that's exactly what happens. So we used to come to Thailand on holiday, and there's a wonderful nursing home up in Chiang Mai. So it got to the stage where she didn't recognize me. She was running across traffic. She was shoplifting, but not valuable stuff. In Thailand, we walked along. She loved cuddly toys. So she saw this little cuddly furry pig, and she took this pig. And of course, in Thailand, don't understand what's going on. Theft is theft. So it cost me 600 quid to get her out of the cell in a Thai prison. So it was heartbreaking. For the last 3 years, she couldn't speak and she couldn't know me. And I go back and forward to Chiang Mai. And the key learning to that was live your life and tell people you love them. So that's the key learning. That's it. I think I've had my time.
I have a comment. Wow. Of course, I've known Neil quite a while, and I had a cup of coffee occasionally with his wife before I'll say Alzheimer's became too bad. My mother had Alzheimer's. The funeral, it never stops, right? Every day a little bit of them dies in front of me. So thank you for sharing your journey and your thoughts about the journey. And I didn't know you were like this amazing innovator. This is news to me. So you got any questions, any comments, any observations? Maybe everyone.
Since you're in the film industry, what is your favorite film that you could watch over and over again?
No question, Godfather 2. I love Godfather 2. I think it's a masterpiece. The storytelling, acting, casting, everything about it. I've probably seen it 50 times. Yeah, I think that's one. I love, when I was a kid, I loved epics. I loved Ben-Hur and Jason and the Argonauts. I mean, I was at a lunch in London and I had two people sitting either side of me. And we were talking about films and what our favourite films were. And I had Jason on one side and I had one of the characters from Ben-Hur on the other side of me. Of course, it's wonderful. I loved it.
Thanks for sharing your life story, Neil. It was very wonderful, moving, and so much I could relate to. I just want to ask, are you still inventing anything these days?
I've got one thing I'm still involved with, which is a technology company with the third largest image library in the world. And we've built a search engine that will recognize what you're looking at and tell you where you can buy it close to you. And we get paid per click. So it could go bust at any moment.
Fantastic. I'd love to talk to you later about that.
Yeah, that sort of ties in with what you're working on and stuff. Susie? There we go. So you probably get some investors out of it. Anyone else with a comment? I don't know about everybody else, but it made me reflect and remember things from my life and stuff, and how my brother was 4.5 years older than me, and like, if your brother's 4.5 years older than you, and you're 4.5 and he's 9, you're like a free hit, right? You're like a free target.
Actually, it's a bit I left out of the story, because I was in a partnership with my brother, and we were very, very close, but he had that element of bullying all his life and control over me, which I created by not correcting him on ineffective behavior. So we were in business for 35 years. When he heard my wife had got Alzheimer's, and my daughter the same month was diagnosed with MS, and he decided that was the time to try and get my shares cheap. So in terms of a Shakespearean betrayal, he literally, I wouldn't say stole, but he bullied about 30 million quid off me. And then we went to, eventually, when he tried to push it even harder, we went to law, and which I won, but he'd hidden all sorts of stuff and lied and God knows what else. He said, "Can we be friends?" And I said, "Well, I suppose so." So I said, "But you've lost the best brother anyone ever had." So it was a thing, but again, it's just stuff. What I always say to people, the most important thing to do is to work out what your definition of enough is. Once you have enough, everything else is pointless. And I don't need private jets. I don't need anything amazing. But I've got enough to have freedom. And if you have freedom, you have everything.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Very good. Very interesting. I just want to go back to the bullying aspect. I mean, if it's me, if somebody bullies me, I'll hit them with a baseball bat. How do you deal with it today? You know, from your past, if you encounter a bully today?
It's interesting. When I was being bullied, one of the bullies was coming up the stairs as I was going down it, and I've never hit anybody in my life. And he made some comment, and I got hold of him, and I had him on the stairs, and I thought, I can't do it. And I don't know what it is. In fact, even when I got mugged in London, someone came up and hit me, and he was high on drugs or something, and I just felt sorry for him. I've got a very strange mentality. I don't have any aggression. I've never lost my temper in my life. I've had every emotion except boredom. I'm nuts. I am truly nuts.
Yes, it's making me reflect on my life. What I did with my brother, who was so much older than me, is I thought, you know, I'm a free hit. I've got to stop being a free hit. So I started practicing like side kicks up against a tree. And I kept practicing them. Next time he started flailing into me, I did a side kick. I was aiming for his stomach. Maybe I didn't get high enough. Anyway, after that, I stopped being a free hit, and the whole relationship changed in an instant. So thank you for helping us reflect on moments like about moments of significance. And one of the things I've discovered in my journey in life is, what's this after money? What's this? After your health. The most valuable thing in life is your health, mental, physical, spiritual. What's the second most important thing in life, do you think?
Love.
Yeah, I put similarly, what I would say is the loyalty of quality people.
It's the same way of saying it.
Yeah, because life can hit you in all sorts of ways, but if you've got the loyalty of quality people, they'll always be there for you. You'll always have a meal, always have somewhere to stay and stuff. So thank you for sharing your amazing journey through life and helping me reflect on mine, and I'm sure other people have reflected on theirs. And of course, we have a very small token of our deep gratitude. Round of applause for a quality person. Very